Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're tackling a really heavy question, one that honestly feels almost unthinkable. Could a third world war actually break out by 2026? It's, deeply unsettling, but experts are increasingly saying it's, well, more realistic than we might like.
It really is a sobering topic. And yeah, for this deep dive, the goal isn't to scare anyone or, sensationalize. It's about unpacking the sources, looking at what the experts are analyzing, what predictions they're making, just to understand all the different facets here. We want to help you grasp why this conversation is even happening right now.
Okay, so let's start right there. Why now? We hear this phrase a lot. Global instability is at its highest in decades. But what does that actually mean? What is this new peak in tensions really about?
That's a great starting point, because what's really notable is the expert consensus forming. This isn't just coming from the fringes. There's this acknowledged moderate but definitely rising risk, specifically looking towards 2026. Some analyses, you see figures floating around, maybe 20-30% probability.
20 to 30%. Wow. I mean, that doesn't sound like, say, a 50-50 chance, but for something like this, that feels significant.
It is significant, especially compared to, say, 10 or 20 years ago. And it's not down to just one thing. It's a convergence, really. You've got the ongoing war in Ukraine, obviously, then the incredibly tense situation in the Middle East. Add to that the whole Taiwan-China dynamic, and layered over all of it, this growing great power rivalry that feels much sharper now.
Okay, let's try and unpack that 20-30% a bit more. How do these separate issues, Ukraine, the Middle East, Taiwan, how do they add up? How do they contribute to such a concerning overall risk level? It's not like they exist in total isolation.
Exactly. That's the key. Their interconnectedness is the real danger here. Think of them like pressure cookers. Each one's volatile on its own. So Eastern Europe, you have NATO versus Russia. Putin's made some pretty direct warnings about chaos. And there's intelligence, like that German report mentioning 2026 as a possibility for conflict. It's about more than just Ukraine itself.
Right, the wider European security picture.
Precisely. Then shift to the Middle East. It's just perpetually volatile, isn't it? You've got Iran-Israel tensions, U.S. involvement, these proxy conflicts, any one of which could escalate really fast and pull in bigger players.
And the third one you mentioned, the Asia-Pacific, Taiwan.
Yeah, and that brings us to something called the Davidson window.
The Davidson window. I've heard that term. Can you just quickly clarify what that means for people listening?
Sure. It comes from Admiral Philip Davidson, former U.S. commander in the Indo-Pacific. He basically warned Congress that China might develop the capability and perhaps the intent to take action regarding Taiwan by 2027. So it puts a kind of time frame on it, a window of potential heightened risk. As 2026 approaches, we're getting closer to and into that window. So yeah, you see how these aren't isolated sparks. They could potentially ignite something much bigger.
Okay, that interconnectedness. That's where it gets really concerning, isn't it? It's not just a fire in one place. It's about how that fire could spread globally. What are the mechanisms, the catalysts that could turn a regional fight into, World War III?
Well, building right on that point about interconnectedness, a huge factor is what analysts call alliance chains. Think of them like tripwires. A conflict starts somewhere specific.
And suddenly treaty obligations kick in.
Exactly. You've got NATO's Article 5, an attack on one is an attack on all. You have the U.S.-Japan Treaty, other defense pacts involving countries like Australia. These alliances are meant to deter war, of course. But in a real crisis, they could be the very thing that escalates a local conflict incredibly quickly by drawing in the major powers.
So that's how it could spread. But what about how it might be fought? And this wouldn't be like World War II, obviously. How does technology change the equation?
Oh, massively. Technology is a complete game changer. We're talking autonomous drones, AI-guided weapon systems, very sophisticated cyber warfare capabilities. But the really concerning development that people are studying now is AI potentially being integrated with nuclear systems.
AI and nukes, how does that work?
Well, the fear, supported by some research you see on places like archive.org, is that these hyper-fast AI-driven systems could lower the threshold for conflict. Oh. Not necessarily because leaders want war, but because the speed might bypass human deliberation. It could reduce restraint, accelerate responses, maybe even introduce errors we can't predict.
That sounds incredibly dangerous, like taking human judgment out of the loop at the worst possible moment. Okay, so we're hearing these alarming possibilities, the role of alliances, technology. Let's bring in some specific experts. You mentioned Professor Anthony Glees earlier. What are his main points?
Right, Professor Glees. He points to two main potential triggers. First, he talks about an Iran-backed proxy escalation getting out of hand globally. So regional fights involving proxies just spiraling upwards and outwards, pulling in the big powers.
Okay, proxy wars escalating. What's the second trigger?
His second one is the idea of a distracted United States, maybe focused on domestic issues or another crisis somewhere else, creating a perceived window of opportunity for adversaries like Russia or China to make an aggressive move, thinking the U.S. response might be slow or limited.
And these aren't just his views in isolation, are they?
No, not at all. You see similar concerns reflected in analyses from major think tanks, RAND, Brookings, Chatham House. They're generally cautious, saying the risk is moderate, but they all agree it's real and possibly growing. And if you want hard numbers, look at the Atlantic Council survey. They found 40% of their experts foresee a multi-front war by 2035. And crucially, 10% specifically pointed to 2026 as a possibility.
10% for 2026 from that group. It really shows this isn't just speculation, it's a serious topic in geopolitical circles. So putting it all together, the flashpoints, the alliances, the tech, the expert views, is the answer yes, it could happen in 2026. Is that the takeaway?
Based on all this analysis, yes, the possibility is definitely there. It cannot be dismissed. We're looking at those risk estimates, roughly 1 in 4, maybe a bit higher depending on the trigger. It's a plausible scenario. And if it did happen, the picture painted is pretty stark. It might start seemingly contained, maybe the Middle East, maybe Taiwan.
But then the alliances kick in.
Exactly. Superpowers get drawn in fast. Escalation would likely be rapid, involving cyber attacks, maybe space assets, those AI weapons we discussed. And the scenarios specifically mention risks around nuclear systems, even potentially new delivery methods like undersea AI platforms. It's a very modern, very dangerous picture.
Understanding those scenarios is vital, definitely. But let's shift gears slightly. It can't all be about risk. What about prevention? What can actually be done to steer away from this? There has to be an off-ramp, right?
Absolutely. And that's where diplomacy becomes paramount. It's the constant essential work. Things like negotiating new arms treaties are vital, especially since old ones like the INF Treaty are gone. Strengthening institutions like the UN, initiatives through the G7, and crucially, direct dialogue about these new technologies, particularly AI weapons, and pushing for nuclear disarmament efforts. These are the tools we have.
Okay, so diplomatic tools, treaties. What about us? What about the public? Does public opinion matter in all this?
Oh, definitely. Public awareness is a huge factor. You see polls showing that a significant chunk of people in the U.S. and Europe, maybe 45, 55%, already believe a major war is likely within 10 years. That kind of widespread concern puts real pressure on governments. It forces them to prioritize prevention, to engage in that diplomacy you mentioned. It shows leaders that people are watching and expect them to act to, well, avoid the worst. So, to circle back to the main question, could World War III start in 2026? The evidence suggests it's within the realm of realistic scenarios now. But, and this is the crucial part, it is absolutely not inevitable.
Right. And that makes the next year, year and a half incredibly critical. Things like diplomatic courage, finding ways to rebuild trust, create robust agreements, and just staying vigilant globally. That's what could make the difference. So maybe the final thought for you, our listener, is this. How do we grapple with these new technologies, especially AI? Can they be harnessed for prevention, or do they just accelerate risk? And how does our own understanding as individuals feed into that larger picture of global stability? Something to think about.